Hi, hello. My name is David Foreman. I am the Vice President of Munro Defense, and thank you for tuning in to the Munro Live podcast. And today we have with us Brigadier General Doug Slocum. So welcome to our podcast, and I'm personally, for my first podcast, I'm excited to have you here.
I'll be gentle, I promise.
So, we spoke just a few moments ago, and thank you for bringing me in a copy of your book, Violent Positivity.
Okay.
And Odie, I know that you're a former fighter jet pilot.
Yeah.
You have a pretty impressive career, and you've done a lot of cool things. Is Odie a call sign, or where did you get that from?
That's exactly right. That was my fighter pilot call sign for many years. Started in Tucson, Arizona. You got Iceman, Goose, and Maverick and those types, and now you got Odie, which literally started as when I first began as an instructor pilot. I was the newest, youngest instructor pilot in our organization, and they put me in charge of the briefing rooms, which was about on par with being a janitor. Keeping things cleaned up and all after all the other pilots. And one day it was a young lady in the command post who said, you're like Garfield's little dog Odie. You always get kicked around and you never complain. And she went, arf. And just like that, it stuck. So, and to this day, even my wife, who I met through my work, calls me Odie. So most people, that's how they call me. So,
I spent time in the Army myself, and I had they used to call me Diamond Dave. And so,
are you going to explain that?
I don't know where it ever came from.
Okay.
It's I really don't know. But
right.
Because we didn't do cool stuff like run fighter jets, I did more stuff like mop floors,
And we have our share of that too. So
yeah. So I spent a lot of time in Tucson, Arizona, working with some of the defense contractors down there.
Sure.
And when I was down there, I would see a lot of the warthogs, out there. What an impressive, scary aircraft. You have experience with those, don't you?
I do. I was blessed in my career. I actually started by flying F-4 Phantoms. Did that for a few years, still as a young lieutenant, converted over into the F-16, and that's where I spent the bulk of my career. But then when I got the chance to be the commander out at Michigan's hometown air base at Selfridge, I went to A-10 school while I was already pinned on as a general at that point. So I went to a 2-week-long school to fly the fearsome Warthog, which, for everybody watching, if you don't know, it's the biggest, baddest gun ever designed for an airplane, and they figured out how to make a plane around it. But my time in Tucson was actually over at Tucson International Airport, where we were the International F-16 Training Center. So we actually had more military airplanes over at the International Airport 5 miles away than they had at Davis-Monthan there in Tucson. But that was the bulk of my career, was working with our allies and teaching people how to fly and fight in F-16s.
Why did you, what took you into this type of career? Is it something you always loved, or?
I knew I always wanted to be a pilot. My dad was in the Air Force. He was a pilot for about half of his career. Between Navy and Air Force, I really struggled. I had a better chance at an Air Force scholarship, so I decided to do that going into college. It was one of the stories I tell in the book is when I was my very freshman year in college, joined ROTC, and I wanted to get a scholarship, a pilot scholarship. And there was our commandant of cadets, a captain at the time. I remember walking up and poking me in the chest and saying, we don't give scholarships to non-technical degree students. And if I would have listened to him, I'd have probably never become a pilot. So as the many naysayers in life, I just went around him, applied for, and ended up getting a 3.5-year non-technical degree pilot scholarship. And the short version of it is 2 days after I graduated from East Carolina University, I was off to Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi and starting pilot training. I wanted to fly big airplanes. My goal in life was to fly transports. But I did well enough in pilot training. They say, if you ask for the big planes, we're going to make you a trainer. That's how you're going to start your career. And nobody wanted to do that. So I was like, okay, well, I'll ask for a fighter. And I asked for the Legacy, the fearsome Phantom, the F-4 Phantom that was, such a miraculous plane and part of history. And I got a chance to fly the Phantom for a few years before it retired.
It's funny because, you watch all the movies and, all the the sexiness of the Navy pilots, right? And then you have the Air Force pilots. I mean, what's the big difference between like the Air Force pilot and a Navy pilot?
Well, the Navy guys got a movie, and they had Tom Cruise. I mean, really, outside of the lifestyle of living off of a carrier for a bulk of the Navy pilots, what we do in the air is very similar. The skill sets and everything else. So I can't say that there's a huge differentiation other than just the service that you're working in at the time.
Why is it not one organization?
That's always a great question. That goes back to our conversation we had leading into this. History. I mean, we started off our country. We had Navy, we had Marines, we had the Army, and eventually then coming out of the World Wars, we spun off the Air Force. Now we have a Space Force. It's just the way we've always done it. Culturally, I say that's a dangerous place to be, but it's a history thing for us right now, I think, not necessarily a logical one, because if I had my way, I think we should just be one service without all these different divisions and boundaries. At this point, I think we could be much more efficient, we could be much more effective, and certainly be a better bang for the bucks for our taxpayers, I think, if we were just the United States Defense Forces. But I can't see politically that ever being able to be a reality.
It would be, I think, a monumental challenge, there's no doubt. Then we couldn't pick on each other either.
Yeah, well, there is that. I always like, give Army and Marines a hard time and everything, whether it's eating crayons or, single syllables, grunts and gestures. And then once we get that going, I said, by the way, I flew A-10s for a while. And then all of a sudden we're all friends again. Because everybody in the Army and Marines loves the A-10 the Warthog because it's been their best friend for decades.
I was at on a program, and there was a colonel in the program, and we were all just sitting around shooting the shit. And he was talking about the time that he spent in Iraq. And he said, we had our column, going through the desert. And then the A-10s would just be flying right over us, go around, fly back. And then we realized that they were practicing. They were practicing aligning themselves up. But the real history of the protection for ground forces is incredible.
It is. And I think what you were probably alluding to, since the Gulf Wars, what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of times if our troops on the ground needed support, they'd call an A-10, and simply an A-10 flying overhead would make the enemy go run and hide, and the battle would be over. We would call that a show of force. A lot of times you didn't have to drop a bomb, shoot the gun, do anything. It was simply the presence of the A-10 was enough to make the enemy withdraw. So I'm guessing that was the whole idea with the convoys. If any bad guys saw the A-10, they knew they weren't going to even try and get anywhere close to it because it wasn't going to end up well for them.
Yeah, it's
Overwatch. Let's call it an Overwatch.
We mentioned it earlier. It's a deterrent.
Deterrent. Perfect.
For many years, I've heard that the A-10 is going to go away. It's hard to imagine, such a capable aircraft going away. What's going to replace it?
Well, the reality is nothing can do exactly what the A-10 does and the way it does it. And that's the up-close, personal, tangible, close air support. There's two people around the wall, get the guy in the orange shirt type of close air support. Other platforms certainly can do CAS, or close air support as we call it. So the A-10's older. It was designed in the mid-'70s and produced in late '70s, early '80s. So they're older. They're not low observable. So their survivability and a near peer-to-peer type of a conflict could be brought into question. So yes, the Air Force from the time they built the A-10 was trying to get rid of the A-10 because they doctrinally don't necessarily think CAS is the best bang for the buck. But at this point, they are programmed to go away. The A-10s within the next few years will be divesting, as the term would use, or sunsetting, but going away.
The F-35 is supposed to be probably one of the last manned aircraft that is going to be fighters that are going to be built. When you think about now going to more of an autonomous flight vehicle, I would assume that a lot of that close ground support is going to come from drones, UAVs, and in that area? Is that where we're going to go?
Well, and that's actually true today. There's a lot that, the Predator Reaper community and everything is kind of pioneered, and they can shoot weapons. They can do Hellfires, they can drop LGBs and everything, and they're a lot more persistent. They can stay on station a lot longer, but they are operated remotely from somebody, could be anywhere in the world, and with a data link, they're able to do that mission. Is it the last manned fighter? I mean, even with the new generation, they're talking about the NGAD, Next Generation Air Defense Plane. The idea is of a manned plane, but then there are multiple CCAs or collaborative combat aircraft, unmanned, that would then be, let's call it the little wingman out there.
Right.
So one pilot with this highly automated type of a system that can control, or with assistive ground control, multiple different vehicles in the air at the same time and present a much more complex or more capable force presentation to any adversary.
Probably bring a lot more situational awareness to the pilot.
Well, and that's true now. There's so many different sources of information. The more we're able to exchange that information and collate it and put it in one place, the sensor fusion, as we would call it, is merging the data from all these different sensors in a way that people can look at it, have a good understanding of what's happening, and make good decisions based on that information. So that's a lot of what's really changed. And when you just talked about the F-35, I think that's one of those things that it brings to the fight. The question was, what's so unique about an F-35? It doesn't, turn necessarily any better. It's not higher, faster than other aircraft, but it brings a degree of situational awareness, which then leads to a capability, I think, that is generations ahead of any other type of platform flying right now.
I had the opportunity some years back to visit Lockheed Martin, in the F-35 assembly line, and you never realize how huge those fighter jets are until you're standing there looking at them, and you look at the cockpit, and they're just massive machines.
They are, and I mean the F-35. I've flew F-16s for a bulk of my career, and really the outside dimensions aren't really that much bigger. But when you look at the F-35, I always refer to it as it just looks chubby. It is, because it's a very wide fuselage, and the idea is to put a lot of gas in there. I mean, yes, you've got the avionics and everything else, but you want to have a lot of fuel to give it some good range, because that's going to be the biggest problem we face a lot. And you don't want to carry external tanks, because that's going to take away the low observable or the stealth characteristics of the airplane. So you want it to have a great range with just internal fuel. So that's why they design it that way. It looks like a little chubby guppy, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, well, it's impressive. What's it like? What's it like flying a jet?
Oh, it can be. I think that's hard to describe. It is, from the F4 to the F-16. When we would take somebody on an incentive ride, their first time ever getting to fly in the airplane, and just the takeoff, the feel of the power of close to 25,000 pounds of thrust of in the case of an F-16. As the afterburners kick in, the acceleration rate. And the next thing literally within seconds, you're up in the air, gears up, and what we'd always do is stay close to the ground till we got towards the end of the runway real fast, and then pull straight up. And with all that thrust, as I said, we just made the world go away. And it's a neat feeling. I mean, flying as a whole, most of my career has been single seat flying. You're there by yourself. There's nobody else in that airplane with you. You are the master of your own domain. It's a feeling of freedom. It's an incredible amount of power, the technology and all that goes into the planes, the capabilities they have. I'm just smiling, thinking a little bit back to all the way to pilot training. There's always a lot of pressure flying with an instructor, but the first time I got to go fly solo, a lot of pressure, and you're worried about it. But when I got up in the area, and it was Mississippi, southern Mississippi, and there's a bunch of clouds, and I realized I am flying an airplane by myself. And I just started kind of doing loops around the clouds and everything up there, and just sort of playing and everything else. And it was just, I think it was this dawning of, oh my gosh, I'm a pilot. And this is so cool. That dawned on me, partway through pilot training, when I had that time where it was just the self-realization in the cockpit that this is pretty neat stuff, and what an incredible opportunity, because of all the time, effort, talents, and treasures that have gone into building our Air Force and the capabilities we have. And I've always considered it a blessing to have the career that I did.
You know, the servicemen, doesn't matter whether it's Air Force, Army, Marine, or Navy, or reservists, or Guard, whoever it is, you know, they're all here for a single purpose, right? And that is to really defend the values that we have as a nation, and to, you know, protect the people, and to, you know, protect our allies. I've always said that the defense industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is huge, but at the end of the day, we're all here for a single purpose, really, and that is to make sure that the servicemen have what they need to be safe, and to you know, again, protect the values. It's such a big industry, but your end customer is all the same.
It is. And, you know, when you were saying that, it kind of made me think, yes, you know, my dad was in the Air Force, so I was very familiar, which is, you know, from a recruiting standpoint, that's one of the things they look for. But there were two events that happened in my life that kind of drove me to make it a no-brainer. When I was a young kid, we lived in Germany, and we traveled on a train, and we went to this place called East Berlin, back when there was a wall.
Right.
And I can remember traveling on that train, going there, standing. I have a picture of me at you know, one of the checkpoints there with the sign behind me. But as a kid, I can remember looking, you know, one side looked gray and dank and dark, and one side was colorful and full of life. There's barbed wire, and there's guns, and there's minefields. And the weird thing is, you know, even as a young kid, the guns were pointed not at us, but inward. The barbed wire and all was facing inward. So the whole idea was to keep the people in the east from getting out to the west. And you don't have to be very old to figure out that that's kind of messed up. So to me, the whole idea as a kid of being right and wrong was very clear. And the second one, you know, once again, my dad was stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California one day. He said, come out to the flight line. I really didn't want to go. As a kid, I wanted to play ball or whatever I was doing. So I think I had little heel marks the whole way out there. But showed up, there was big crowds waiting for a C-141 transport to land. Eventually did, very slow, and some servicemen got off and were hugging their families and all. It wasn't until later in life that I realized that was what was called Operation Homecoming. It was the first POWs from Vietnam landing back in the continental United States.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And I got to witness that. You know, I didn't know it at the time. I do know it now. But once again, you understand, it's like, why were these people in prison? What was it that they did in serving their country? So once again, there's this idea of right or wrong, of good and bad, that was ingrained in me. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm going to serve my country. I'm going to defend this republic and these principles that we stand for.
So you went far in your career. You know, you're Brigadier General, and now you're retired.
Correct.
Tell me about the transition from active service into retirement, and what are you doing with your time now?
Wow. You know, that is a great open-ended question. I think everybody has a different experience of getting out. You know, mine, of course, 35 years in, it certainly kind of became part of who I was every single day. A little different not putting the uniform on. I think I've worn my uniform 3 times since I retired almost 5.5 years ago. But I started working for a company almost immediately. A couple months later, I quit that, and I actually ran for Congress. So I spent a year running for Congress, and that was right when COVID and all happened. So it was a very unique time of what was happening. As I tell folks, I don't think I figured out I was retired until after the primaries, which I lost. I will say I'm probably one of the few people in politics that made friends with their opponents too. So I'll throw that into my positivity bag of tricks there. But I think it took a while for me to realize I was retired. And I think the challenges of folks that are retired, we need to continue to support our servicemen and women. They have different experiences. They handle it differently. You know, transitioning, trying to take those skills you've learned into the military and apply them out in the civilian world can be difficult for a lot. So there's a lot of cool programs that I would just make sure that, please let's support that and continue to take care of these wonderful patriots. But you're asking me what I've been doing. A number of nonprofits, boards. One of the hats I wear is the president of the Air and Space Forces Association of Michigan, and recently got elected to the board of directors at the national level. But one of the things that you've already alluded to is I spent quite a bit of time writing a book, and the title of that book is Violent Positivity, which makes a lot of people tilt their head because that's what I called my leadership style. I said, positivity, it's amazing. When you focus on people, you can make a huge difference in their lives with some of the principles that I talk about in there. Why violent? Because that's what we were in the military. So why not? Let's be violently positive with everybody. People respond to it really well, and it really is fulfilling our greatest calling we have, which is caring for people.
Yeah, absolutely. We had one of our longtime engineers here at Munro who is retired. He used to always say we're in violent agreement. Everyone would comment at different angles, but we're in violent agreement. The leadership is not an easy role. There's so many different personalities. There are just so many things now you have to be careful of. It's an interesting environment, and you obviously you've written a book. You do a lot of speeches and other things about leadership. Mm-hmm. And being a Brigadier General, obviously, you are a leader, right? And
I hope I was.
Yes, absolutely. I always think that leadership is by example, right? You try to my personal style is that I will never ask somebody to do something that I don't want to, right? If I don't want to do it, then I'm going to do it because I'm not going to ask somebody else. It's kind of a leadership style. Everyone has their own thoughts and ideas. What is yours? What is the foundation of your leadership and what you've put into your book?
Well, there's a lot of fundamental principles, but I think the baseline of this would come from what's called the Hawthorne effect, or the teacher expectancy effect. If you tell people that they're good, they're going to think that they're good. They're going to act like they're good, and they're going to get better. It's a pretty simple formula of giving people the benefit of the doubt. Organize, train, equip, motivate, and then get out of their way. Be nearby if somebody needs you, but then just watch them shine. Nowadays, with social media, there's so much negativity that people get bombarded with. I think it's so easy to be that shining example, that lighthouse up there beaming that light of leadership that guides people to help them make good decisions in their careers, to get engaged, to get ownership of something, and to make a success, that it's so easy to contrast what's going on out there in the community as a whole. Again, I'll go back to social media, the news. It seems like we're bombarded with negativity. So I think leadership has a wonderful opportunity to be just the opposite of that. Be the positive force in people's lives that help them achieve excellence.
We had lunch together today. Thank you.
Yeah.
And one of the questions really, and it goes back to this conversation, and I told you I was gonna ask you a question that what's it like when you put that star on, but that wasn't important. It goes back to what you just said, really about people and personal achievements, and it's not about rank. It's about those awards and those achievements, whether you're in the military or anywhere else, that really brings out what value people are really driving.
Well, a lot of folks talk about rank, and rank is not an award. It is something you're given to be able to accomplish a job. The more responsibility you have, the more rank, so that you can get a seat at the table or open the door to help take care of people. To me, by far the greatest reward is getting feedback. I had somebody call me one time this day. You told me when I was trying to achieve this new level that now's not the time. I need to do the following steps and everything. And he called me up. He said, here we are over 5 years later. And he goes, I wanted you to know I did it. And I just got selected into this new role and responsibility that I've been looking for. He goes, and I wanted to let you know it's because I followed the path that you set for me. It's that kind of feedback to me as a leader that makes all the difference. In other words, you're making a difference in people's lives. The fact that, I was able to pin on a star or whatever, once again, it just allowed me to do things for people to a new level. And if we've got time, I'm going to go ahead with one more story with that. So the commander in the Guard, when your folks deploy overseas, they become part of the active duty. So they go away, so you're like an empty nester in a way. So I had my KC-135s were deployed overseas. And when they're there, you kind of lose track. You don't know if there's ever problems and stuff going on at home. But the short version of this story is one of our individuals overseas ends up having a stroke. Actually had a couple strokes. So they aerovac them from Afghanistan up to Germany. They're watching, there's not a lot we can do at this point. It's been a couple weeks, and on a Friday afternoon, we get a phone call that he's taken a turn for the worst and probably isn't going to make it. So, okay, we need to get the wife over there. Let's take care of that. My squadron folks start calling. They call me up and say, well, the bad news is she doesn't have a passport. And according to the calls that we're making, the State Department's saying, okay, well, next Tuesday or next Wednesday. And I remember thinking, that is not the right answer.
Right.
I picked up the phone and I hit a speed dial. And I said, Congressman, this is Odie. I think you could tell by my tone of voice. He goes, what do you need? I explained the situation. He said, hang up your phone. I said, okay. Within about 5 minutes, my phone rang back, and it was the White House. And somebody from the White House saying, what do you need? I explained the situation. They said, hold on, you're going to get a call back. So literally within about another 5 or 10 minutes, they called back and they said, tomorrow morning, the passport office in Chicago on a Saturday morning is going to open just for this wife.
Wow.
So I had one of my folks escort her from Detroit over to Chicago, got the passport, I think while that thing was still hot off the press, literally, over onto a plane in Chicago to get her to be with her husband over in Germany. The good news, the wife got over there. The husband actually survived. He came back. We went and visited him. He did a miraculous recovery. He's part of our community now. He had to medically retire out of the military. But I love to tell that story for a number of reasons. One is I was a general, so I could speed dial the congressman. I had that type of relationship, and we had that understanding with each other. He didn't ask if I was a Democrat or Republican or who the constituent was. He did what he was supposed to do as an elected official to help take care of the problem. And then ultimately, in the long run, he actually sponsored legislation to help spouses be able to get passports and to smooth that whole process out as a result of that lesson learned. But it's why you're in a leadership position is to help take care of people and solve problems like that. I know it's kind of a long story to go with it, but there is no higher calling we ever have than caring for people.
It's a good lesson for everybody, right? The more we can do, and the higher up, the more you can do. And we just have to do everything we can. It's a great story. I appreciate you sharing it. I was going to ask you, while you were in your career, let me know a couple of your highlights, but I think that was one of your highlights.
Yeah. And time going, I'd love to tell you one other one very quick here.
Absolutely.
Too. One of the things I talk about a lot in the book is the incredible power of words. When we talk about that Hawthorne effect, it's a lot of what comes out of our mouth that can build people up and it can tear them down. But when social media first came out, I was very hesitant to start an account, not big on it, but finally I said, you know what, I'm going to start a Facebook account. And within a week, bing, I got my first ever Facebook message. And I still remember it verbatim to this day, and said, hello, my name is Tyler. You dated my mother when I was 4 years old. And I about had a heart attack at that point. I said, wait, okay. And anybody not laughing right now, you'll get that later. He had just turned 18 years old, and he was reaching out, and he was talking to me. Well, we got phone numbers and everything, so we started talking. And he said he was turning 18, and he had just joined the United States Air Force. And I said, well, cool. Why'd you do that? He said, because of you. I said, wait, you were 4. He goes, yep. He goes, but you used to come into my room. You brought a book in about planes. You were dressed in your flight suit. You'd sit down and talk about planes. He goes, as a matter of fact, sitting on my desk today is a book, The World's Encyclopedia of Military Aircraft, or something geeky like that. He goes, but it's sitting on my desk right here. But because of that, I'm deciding to join the U.S. Air Force. Who would think that something that you would say or do with a 4-year-old would end up making them driving life decisions once they become an adult? But that's the incredible power that we have as leaders, as anybody. You don't have to even be in a position of leadership. It's simply the influence that you have on people's lives and being positive that can help them on paths later in life. You never know what kind of seeds you're going to plant. Talking to a 4-year-old that changed the decisions he made when he was an adult. So, Tyler, what an incredible story. What a great young man. But man, every word that comes out of our mouth, we should be thinking very closely about what we're doing, and we should lift people up. We should encourage them in any way that we can, because it's going to just make things better in the long run and make them better people, better leaders, and a better community.
Absolutely. There's not a lot to add to that. It's just an incredible story. A friend to a long time ago, actually was the best man at my wedding, had told me that words are important, and think before you speak, because what you say has an impact, right?
Well, now we go to the book, and it was just 2 weeks ago. I went up to an event, and this lady who was in the Civil Air Patrol, she said, "Well, my husband wants to meet you." I'm like, okay. And he walks up, he says, "I want to know, when at the Civil Air Patrol conference," he goes, "I bought one of your books, you signed it for me." Now, this guy is retired Air Force. He now works with an airline, and he was talking about an incident that happened on the flight line with the airlines, and a young kid who screwed up and did something. And he said, I took the normal fighter pilot approach of fear, sarcasm, and ridicule to deal with this kid. He goes, but when I got home, he said, I picked up your book and started reading again. He goes, I realized I handled it all wrong. So he said, I went back. He goes, I wrote a letter to the company chief of safety, to this individual supervisor, and said, at least this kid, he screwed up. He's young and he's inexperienced, but he also fessed up to what he did. He said he was handling it in a mature way. He said he actually is the type of an employee that we want in this organization throughout time, because he's going to learn and he's going to be better as a result of that. He goes, but I wanted to thank you for this book because it changed what I did. And once again, I'm good. One person that was able to do something because of the efforts put into that book, it is about moving the needle in that direction towards excellence, made it all worthwhile.
So why did you write a book?
Well, I used to spend a lot of time traveling and teaching, leadership, culture, safety, and I always started out trying to write a book about the same things that I talked about when I was on stage, when I got in front of folks. So talking about these different principles, and then I wanted to tie in the personal stories, and it was so difficult. I've actually worked for many, many years and just got frustrated and gave up. Well, once I retired, once I was done running for Congress, I took a sabbatical and went up to a cabin up near Grayling and just took a week and sat down. But one of the things I realized is I can't just talk about the principles and tell the stories, because I have to explain how I got here to begin with. So I wanted to tell the stories of what are the experiences that I had that led to me taking this approach, that then led to the realization of these principles that I was blessed to teach around the U.S. military for so many years. So 2/3 of the book ended up being an autobiography. I mean, that's not the way it started at all, but it was a realization of, in order to tell this story properly, that's what I need to do. So it starts off with, when I'm a very young kid, and then it chronologically walks through up until I got into that position of leadership, and then I start hitting on these leadership principles and some of the cool stuff that was a result of that, whether it was safety, suicide prevention, caring for people programs, or simply, what the men and women at Selfridge were able to accomplish in about 4.5 years that I was blessed to be out there.
You've used the word safety now a couple of times in the last couple of discussions. I did a little bit of research on your background, before.
And you still want to talk with me? Okay.
Usually people don't want to talk to me, but you've done you're a pilot, fighter pilot, but also you've done stuff with vehicle safety, and you're still a part of that. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing on the safety end of things.
Well, and that started in my career when I had the opportunity to be a chief of safety. And I like to talk about the bosses that I had who gave me, some leeway to be able to do some things beyond just what the books say a lot of times. And when I started in safety, I struggled with a little bit. I wanted to define safety, and to me, I ended up coming up with the phrase, anything that keeps anybody from getting home safely every night. So suicide prevention. Well, if somebody commits suicide, they don't get home. I considered that a safety thing. Well, the military, at least in the Air Force, that belonged to the Surgeon General. Nope, I'm going to get involved with that. So I was able to do a lot of things and take innovative approaches. I think my first foray into safety at all was based on my personal experience. I was flying an F-16 and coming back one day and almost hit a little airplane during our arrival back into Tucson, Arizona. I asked air traffic control, I said, are you seeing this person? They're going, nope, they didn't see him. I said, mark the tapes. Let's go find this out. So I land, I come back, and now I'm going to put on my safety officer hat. Let's go find this person. They had no clue. They had a nice poster set up in the FBO where the general aviation was set up out of the airport he flew out of, but it was all about where the A-10s flew and Davis-Monthan. He had no clue that where he was flying around was right on the arrival corridor for Tucson International Airport and the F-16s there. So the realization to me was, well, Davis-Monthan did their thing, Tucson did their thing. Everybody does it differently, and it was set up that way in the rules. I said, that's terrible. General aviation then doesn't know what to do unless they know that specific base, and then each base's program is going to be different. So making it, this cool story really short was like, why are they all doing it different? Let's try and come up with one-stop shopping. Let's come to one place where general aviation can figure out where military airplanes fly so we can make sure we don't swap paint, that we're going to not run into each other. I couldn't, locally, I couldn't do it. I mean, we're talking about setting up websites and all. I went to the regional, nothing. And it wasn't until I was talking to my buddy back in Washington, D.C. one time. He said, what's your idea? He said, I think I've got a way to do this. And we went to an office in the Pentagon. We got some seed money, and we started up with what we ended up calling seeandavoid.org, which was a website that incorporated all of the different mid-air collision avoidance programs from all the services and linked into the airspace. It gave general aviation one place to go, and it was so effective. For the years that seeandavoid.org was out there and working, there was zero military general aviation mid-air collisions. Nowadays, there's technology built into the planes where everybody can have an awareness of where the other planes are. So from a safety standpoint, we've solved that through technology, but we did it through simple innovation by looking at something from a new perspective of there's a better way to do this. And that then went into the human factors in maintenance. I took what we did as pilots and applied it to aircraft maintenance, and that ended up being not just an Air Force-wide program, but a worldwide. Numerous Air Forces around the world adopted a safety program that I was able to write in Tucson, Arizona, and then ultimately take to the national stage and beyond. But to the suicide prevention and all, there were so many different programs like that. Those were the stories that I wanted to tell in the book. How did we get to this place of saving lives and making a difference in people, whether it was flying, traffic safety, mid-air collision avoidance, whatever it happened to be. And then once again, ending with Michigan's hometown heroes out there at Selfridge and all the cool stuff that happened there. That's why I wrote the book.
I look forward to getting into it a little bit more, learning a little bit more. And I can travel around and you give motivational speeches now?
And that's what I've done actually for a long time. Well before I ever wrote the book and everything else, leadership, training, organizational culture. There are some very simple tools that you can apply that make a huge difference in people. That make organizations more efficient and ultimately safer. And to me, that's, like I said, the higher calling is making sure we're taking care of people.
I'm gonna go back and talk a little bit more about drones for a second.
Okay.
Because they talk about cars, flying cars, you have drones, and you're starting to see a lot more of that, besides the noise pollution that's going to drive in this world. But it's going to drive a safety. It can drive a safety issue, too, when we start to see a lot more drones, people flying personal drones. What do you see happening in the world when you start seeing all the sky starting to fill up with these?
Well, and the FAA is, doing, I think, a pretty good job of trying to keep their arms around that because there's only certain places you can operate drones. I I have a hard time saying the word drone because we always refer to them as unmanned vehicle or unmanned systems or something like that. But in the civilian world, yes, the term drone. You can't operate them near airports, certain events, et cetera, and in controlled airspace. So I think it's the uncontrolled airspace, some of those types of issues where, a little drone flying around can be a problem. And of course, we've seen some conflicts between drones, but the more information we have, it goes almost back to our F-35 discussion. We can collect this information. If we know where the drones are, then we can avoid and make sure that people aren't hitting them or there's conflicts of some sort, safety issues that result from the drones. The tough part with the drone is, it has controls. The people on the ground can have a camera, but they're not in it. They can't see. And it goes back to that see and avoid. So one of the things right now is you can't fly a drone in controlled airspace because you can't see and avoid. So there's only certain things you can do right now with drones, but it is going to be an increasing problem, especially when they start coming out in multiples, exponentially more than we have now.
Yeah, we're starting to see, especially on social media, especially with drones now that have, everything has a camera on it, right? And you can socialize that. And you're starting to see a lot more videos, especially out of Ukraine and whatnot, where drones are being deployed in warfare. And it's a very inexpensive way to deliver a payload, and it's. What's your thought on that whole situation?
So when they had the Olympics in Korea, it's been a long time since then, but I think that was one of the first times I ever saw. They had a laptop that controlled the hundreds of lighted drones, and they were making the Olympic rings, and they were making the different designs. Yeah. And I can remember thinking to myself, as somebody in the military at the time, was, oh no. Think about this now. You have a person with a laptop being able to control these multiple independently operated drones by the hundreds in a particular case. That now if you're trying to defend something, you can shoot down one or two, but what are you going to do when you got 100 of them coming at you at once from different directions or things like that? I said, we have crossed into a new realm of capabilities. Inexpensive, in a lot of cases. We've seen, anywhere from the war with Azerbaijan and Armenia to Ukraine or to what happened in Israel with Gaza. Yeah. Very simple drones with, little thermite grenades that can attack, expensive targets. It has changed a lot of the rules of warfare and certainly what the threat matrix is out there that we have to defend against. And where does that limit stop? That's why we pay a lot of folks big bucks to help us get and hopefully keep answers to these potential adversaries. Yeah,
well, hopefully one day people don't need to live like that anymore. But
let's hope.
I think that's going to be a ways off. But let's talk about other things. So, what's the future for you? You're thinking, or maybe buying some land, building a new home.
Yep. Well, my wonderfully brilliant daughter just started as a freshman at the University of Michigan. So as I told my wife, we didn't want to move till she was out of the house. So we've kind of want to get out of our subdivision we've been in since we've lived here in Michigan. So we are buying some land and plan to build a house out there. So that's going to take some time going forward in the future. I just recently got elected to the board of directors for the Air and Space Forces Association at the national level. So kind of taking what I'm doing with that advocacy group to the next level. But always, staying an advocate for our veterans, staying engaged with our community in whatever ways is fruitful, wherever I can add value.
If you take all your experience, what is the advice that you would give to a younger generation just now, maybe, going into college, going out of college, moving into their career?
That's a fantastic question. I think the biggest would be focus on people. I think back to my, all these people that I've known through the years that I didn't necessarily stay in touch with. It took me way too long in my career to figure out that, whenever I have a problem, whenever I have a program, my first question out of my mind is who can be on my team? Who do I know? Who's in my network? To use the old term, pull out my Rolodex. Get to know people, keep in touch with people, because it's going to be those relationships that are going to define your success or failure going forward in the future. I wish I would have known that earlier. One of the analogies I like to say is if you ever pull out a photo album from your past, if you look at the pictures, there might be pictures of, a landscape or a building. You're going to just flip right past that. You're going to go to pictures that have faces on them. And you're going to look at who the people are that were in those pictures. And that's what's going to, that's where your interest is going to lie. So my photo album of life, I wish I would have kept touch with a lot of these talented, amazing people that I've met through the years. It took me too long. So my one piece of advice would be get to know people, grab onto people, keep those relationships tight, because it's going to define so much of what you're able to do, the influences that you're going to have, and the positive difference you're going to be able to make going forward. It's always about people.
Well, with that, I think that we can probably bring this podcast to an end.
It's a good way to end it.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for your time. I've learned quite a bit with you today, and I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I look forward to reading your book, making it available to the folks that, I work with.
I will say, that title, Violent Positivity, I've set up a website. It's simply violentpositivity.com. And there's some information available there, as well as the link to Amazon, where you can get the Kindle or the paperback version of Violent Positivity. But once again, it's just violentpositivity.com.
Yeah, and that's you with the A10 in the background, right?
It is.
So,
guy that took that picture, as well as my graphic artists, I said, they did such good work. I said, sometimes you can judge a book by its cover, because that's a pretty cool cover.
It is a pretty cool cover. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.